It's my favorite time of the year, Senior Bowl practices and the countdown to the NFL draft. Day 2 of practices featured a lot more intensity, and we got to see even more one-on-one drills while mixing in red zone work as well. This is a full breakdown of my notes and takeaways from day 2 of Senior Bowl practices. The guy that stood out the most was Mike Green, who had himself a day. The Marshall pass rusher led the FBS with 17 sacks, and he showcased power and explosion. He's checking all of the boxes, and he absolutely dominated on day 2. His draft stock is hard to place right now. Coming into the Senior Bowl, some viewed him as a day 2 guy, while some have him as high as the top 10. Day 1, he was a bit up and down, but he was the talk of the town in day 2. This is a guy who is rising up draft boards and putting himself into the round 1 conversation. Another guy who was just incredibly impressive was Texas A&M star defensive lineman Shemar Stewart, a guy who only had 4.5 sacks in his collegiate career. Most people overlook him due to his lack of production as a pass rusher, but there is simply too much talent there. A freak athlete with an insane blend of power, size, and speed. One of the freakiest athletes in the entire draft. A guy who squats 600 plus pounds and actually broke a squatting machine. He was dominant lining up at both defensive tackle and outside on edge. He really impacted the team drills and would have had 3 straight sacks during just one team period. This is a guy who had 1.5 sacks all year, and he could end up getting more than that on Saturday during the Senior Bowl game. Look out for Shemar Stewart, another guy whose stock is risen to first round conversation. But the next guy really showcased the talent on the defensive line overall, and it's not Walter Nolan or even Deon Walker. It's a guy who's been overlooked due to the amount of talent on hand in mobile. South Carolina's TJ Sanders. He has looked awesome so far. He had a rep where he bull rushed LSU lineman Miles Frazier and just absolutely buried him. But he's flashed size, speed, and power during practice this week. Another guy who is rising up draft boards. And then I want to talk about Tez Johnson, the Oregon speedster who struggled in day 1. He bounced back in the second day of practice. He showcased his quick release and his ability to separate and leave cornerbacks in the dust. Tez is blazing fast. He actually went as far to say himself that he plans to break Xavier Worthy's 40-yard dash time at the combine. I do not see that happening, but he is fast and he was unguardable in one-on-one drills today, showcasing his ability to separate, and his work as a route runner will be noticed by scouts. But size concerns are not going to just disappear. It was a great day for Tez Johnson, and there were 2 other wideouts to note. Both Jaden Higgins and JAYLIN NOEL were impressive. Keep an eye on both those guys as well. Another guy that has really helped himself this week is Florida State cornerback Azareye'h Thomas. While most of the attention has been on the trenches, a couple of corners have really stood out. Thomas joins Kentucky's Maxwell Harrison as 2 guys who have just been locking down receivers all week in practice. His draft stock is all over the place, but he's a legit top 100 prospect, and I think he has the upside to rise as high as the first round. People overlooked him due to how terrible Florida State was this season, but this is another prospect who is helping himself during the Senior Bowl week. A couple of other standouts from day 2's practice include North Dakota State's offensive lineman Gray Zabel. He's played all over the line, including at center, and he's having a huge week. 2 other guys that caught my eye yesterday were Devin, Neal, and Trevor Etienne, both really showcasing the talent in this year's running back class. Both of those guys had big days. Devin Neal just looks the part, and Trevor Etienne was awesome in receiving drills. And then Boston College's edge rusher Donovan Ezeiruaku continues flashing his skills as a pass rusher. He did a cross chop move that made an offensive lineman look silly. And then North Carolina interior lineman Willie Lumpkin, he had some nice reps today, including even battling Walter Nolan a couple of times. And then I have to mention the tight end class that has just really stood out. We already know about stud prospect Tyler Warren, but three guys really have stood out during this week's practices. Miami's Elijah Arroyo, Oregon's Terrence Ferguson, and LSU's Mason Taylor. All three have looked great. But now I did want to give a couple of injury updates and reports from the week. Two players left practice early yesterday, both stars on Ole Miss's defensive line. Pass rusher Princely Umanamilayan and stud defensive tackle Walter Nolan. Princely did return to practice shortly after, but Nolan did not. Walter Nolan has been the best player during this week of practices, and he continued his dominance most of the day. But he ended up leaving late in practice, and currently there have been no updates. Hoping he returns to practice today. He's a legit top 15 player in the upcoming draft, and he's been my favorite player to watch during this week of practices. Finally, an update on Purdue's offensive lineman Mbu, a potential first-round pick. He missed the first 2 days of practices. He's been sick, and he's now pulled out of the Senior Bowl week. I really wanted to see how he held up against this defensive line class, but it's just a missed opportunity there. And then one final note, I was really impressed that Notre Dame players were not only participating, but taking the event seriously. Linebacker Jack Kaiser had a big interception on Jalen Monroe, and then quarterback Riley Leonard looked like he not only knew the offense, but he was comfortable operating no huddle and hurry ups as well. Look, Riley just played in the national championship and he took a beating, but he was out there competing against the best players in the country just a week later. I love his toughness. Day 3 of practices are underway. You can catch the game live at 2:30 Eastern Saturday on NFL Network. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and stay tuned for more year-round NFL draft coverage.